Before we begin, if you're navigating the strange, uncomfortable territory of psychological and spiritual transformation, where nothing looks like what the Instagram quotes promised, subscribe to Empire of the Mind. We explore what real awakening looks like from a depth psychological perspective. Messy, subtle, and profoundly destabilizing. This isn't surface-level spirituality. This is the real work. Now, there is a form of awakening that does not look dramatic. It does not come with visions, voices, or sudden enlightenment. There's no blinding light, no mystical download, no moment where everything suddenly makes sense and you achieve permanent peace. According to Carl Jung, spiritual awakening often begins as psychological tension, a quiet discomfort, a sense that the life you are living no longer fits the person you are becoming. And if you're waiting for it to feel blissful, you might miss it entirely. Let's explore what awakening actually looks like when it's real, not performed. 1. The uncomfortable beginning. Jung called this the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, rather than who you've been conditioned to be. And it rarely feels peaceful at first. In fact, it usually feels like something's going wrong. You might be experiencing restlessness in a life that looks perfectly fine from the outside. You have the job, the relationship, the accomplishments, but something underneath feels hollow. You can't quite name it, but you know something's off. Or maybe you're noticing that activities that used to bring satisfaction now feel empty. The promotions don't excite you. The social events drain you. The conversations that once engaged you now feel scripted and shallow. This isn't depression, though it can be mistaken for it. This is the psyche sending you a message. The container you've been living in has become too small. The identity you constructed or that was constructed for you no longer has room for who you're becoming. And here's what makes this so confusing. Nothing external has to change for this to begin. You can be living the same life you were living 6 months ago, but internally, everything has shifted. What once felt stable now feels constricting. What once felt meaningful now feels like performance. Jung understood that this discomfort is not a problem to fix. It's the first sign that the psyche is ready to grow beyond its current boundaries. The self, the deeper organizing center of your being, is beginning to assert itself. And the ego, which has been running the show, is starting to realize it's not actually in charge. 2. The first sign, disillusionment. One of the clearest signs of awakening is disillusionment. And I mean that literally, the loss of illusions. You begin questioning things that once felt solid, unquestionable, foundational. Your beliefs, your ambitions, your relationships, even your image of God, if you had one. This is not rebellion. It's not cynicism. It's differentiation. The psyche separating inherited identity from authentic identity. You start noticing which values are actually yours and which ones you absorbed from parents, culture, religion, or peer pressure. You start questioning whether the goals you've been chasing are actually your goals, or just the goals you were told to have. Success stops being an obvious good. Normal stops being something to aspire to. Should starts sounding less like wisdom and more like control. And this can be deeply unsettling, especially if you've built your entire life around those inherited values. Because if those aren't actually true for you, then who are you? What do you actually want? What actually matters when you strip away everything you were supposed to want? Jung would say you're in the process of discovering your authentic self. But that discovery requires the dismantling of the false self first. And dismantling always feels like loss before it feels like freedom. 3. The second sign, inner conflict. Another sign you're awakening, increased inner conflict. You notice contradictions inside yourself that you can't easily resolve. Part of you wants security. Another part wants meaning, even if it's risky. Part of you wants approval. Another part wants the truth, even if it's unpopular. Part of you wants to fit in. Another part wants to be authentic, even if it means standing alone. This tension is not weakness. This is not you being indecisive or broken. Jung believed the self, the deeper organizing center of the psyche, emerges through conflict, not despite it. Awakening is not transcendence of the human condition. It's the integration of the contradictions within it. You don't resolve these tensions by choosing one side and eliminating the other. You grow by holding both, by developing the psychological capacity to contain paradox without collapsing into either or thinking. The ego hates this. The ego wants clarity, wants to know which choice is right, wants a simple answer. But the self doesn't work that way. The self asks you to mature into complexity, to develop tolerance for ambiguity, to stop demanding that reality be simpler than it actually is. So if you're feeling pulled in multiple directions, if you're noticing parts of yourself that seem incompatible, if you're struggling to choose between equally valid but mutually exclusive paths, you're not confused. You're individuating. 4. The third sign, heightened sensitivity. You may also experience heightened sensitivity during awakening, and this is one of the most commonly misunderstood signs. You feel things more deeply than you used to. Injustice that you once could ignore now unsettles you profoundly. Superficial conversations that you once could tolerate now exhaust you. Noise, literal and metaphorical, feels louder, more intrusive. This does not mean you are fragile. This does not mean you need to toughen up or develop thicker skin. It means your psyche is turning inward. As individuation begins, the outer world becomes less convincing than the inner one. Your sensitivity isn't increasing randomly, it's increasing selectively. You're becoming attuned to what's real and allergic to what's false. You can sense inauthenticity in ways you couldn't before. You pick up on subtext, on what's not being said, on the gap between someone's words and their actual energy. And this makes navigating the world harder, because you can no longer unsee what you're seeing. But Jung would say this is necessary, because you cannot individuate while remaining numb. You cannot become who you truly are while staying disconnected from what you actually feel, sense, and know to be true. The sensitivity isn't the problem. The problem is that the world wasn't designed for sensitive awakening people. It was designed for people who can ignore, compartmentalize, and keep performing. And you're losing that ability not because you're weak, but because your psyche is demanding integrity. 5. The fourth sign, sacred loneliness. Another subtle sign of awakening is a particular kind of loneliness. Not because people abandoned you, not because you're isolated or rejected, but because you can no longer pretend to be who you were. You feel slightly out of place in spaces that once felt normal. Gatherings with old friends feel strange. Family dynamics that you used to navigate on autopilot now feel exhausting or impossible. Conversations that once engaged you now feel like you're speaking a different language. Jung would say you are shedding a persona, the social mask that once kept you safe, helped you belong, allowed you to function in the world without too much friction. The persona isn't all bad. We all need one. It's how we interface with society, how we meet social expectations, how we protect our inner world from constant exposure. But when the persona becomes too rigid, when it starts to replace your actual self rather than just representing it, the psyche rebels. And when the persona loosens, identity feels uncertain. You're not sure who you are in social situations anymore. You don't know how to show up authentically without alienating people or making things awkward. You feel caught between performing the old version of yourself and not yet knowing how to embody the new one. This uncertainty is sacred. It's uncomfortable, yes. Lonely, absolutely. But it means the ego is no longer pretending to be the center. It means you're in the transitional space between who you were and who you're becoming. Jung called this the liminal zone, and you can't rush through it. You have to inhabit it, even though it feels like nowhere. 6. The fifth sign, shadow awareness. Awakening also brings shadow awareness. And this is where a lot of people get confused, because they think awakening should make them feel more enlightened, more pure, more evolved. Instead, you begin noticing your envy, your resentment, your pride, your pettiness, your insecurity. All the parts of yourself you've been denying or projecting onto others suddenly become visible. This can feel deeply discouraging. You might think, I thought I was growing. Why am I seeing all this ugliness in myself now? But Jung insisted that spiritual maturity begins not in light, but in the recognition of darkness. The ego wants to be good. It wants to be virtuous, innocent, beyond reproach. But the self wants to be whole. And wholeness requires confronting what you once denied. Shadow work isn't about becoming bad. It's about becoming honest. It's about integrating the parts of yourself you disowned because they didn't fit your idealized self-image. When you start seeing your shadow, you're not regressing. You're actually progressing because you can only integrate what you can see. As long as your shadow remains unconscious, it controls you. The moment you bring it into awareness, you gain the possibility of choice. So if you're suddenly aware of jealousy you didn't know you had, or anger you've been suppressing, or neediness you've been denying, congratulations. You're waking up to the fullness of who you are, not just the parts you've been comfortable showing. 7. The sixth sign, collapse of outer authority. Another powerful sign of awakening is the collapse of outer authority. You stop blindly accepting what leaders, institutions, traditions, or experts tell you. Not because you've become arrogant or dismissive of wisdom, but because you feel called to verify the truth internally, to test it against your own experience, to see if it actually holds up when you examine it honestly. Jung believed authentic spirituality is never second-hand. It must be experienced, wrestled with, and embodied. You can inherit teachings, but you cannot inherit realization. That has to be earned through your own confrontation with reality. This is where you might start questioning religious doctrines you were raised with. Not to reject them necessarily, but to see if they're actually true for you, or just comforting stories you've been repeating. You might start questioning psychological frameworks, spiritual teachers, political ideologies, anything that once served as an unquestioned source of truth. And this can be destabilizing, because those external authorities provided structure, certainty, and direction. But individuation requires that you develop your own relationship with truth. That doesn't mean rejecting all guidance or thinking you have to figure everything out alone. It means you become the final authority on what's true for you. You listen, you learn, you consider, but you no longer outsource your knowing. 8. The seventh sign, symbolic thinking. Finally, awakening often brings what Jung called symbolic thinking. Dreams intensify. They become more vivid, more memorable, more obviously meaningful, even if you can't fully interpret them yet. Meaning feels layered. A conversation isn't just a conversation, it's resonating with something deeper. A book isn't just a book. It's arriving at exactly the right moment with exactly the message you needed. Coincidences feel charged. Synchronicities multiply. You notice patterns, echoes, and recurring themes across different areas of your life. This is not superstition. It's not magical thinking. It's the psyche speaking in images, what Jung called the language of the unconscious. When you're individuating, the unconscious becomes more active, more communicative. It's trying to get your attention, to guide you, to show you what your conscious mind can't yet see. And it does this through symbols, through dreams, through the meaningful arrangement of events that logic alone can't explain. If you're suddenly paying attention to your dreams, if you're noticing synchronicities, if the world feels more alive with meaning than it used to, your psyche is waking up. Not to fantasy, but to a deeper layer of reality that's always been there, but that you're only now becoming sensitive enough to perceive. Spiritual awakening is not about becoming special. It's about aligning with your actual self, your actual values, and your experience of reality, rather than the version you've been performing. It is quieter than social media suggests, more uncomfortable than motivational speeches admit, more psychologically demanding than most spiritual teachers prepare you for. But if you feel restless in comfort, sensitive to falseness, drawn toward truth, even when it costs you, if you're questioning everything, feeling everything more deeply, and struggling to fit back into the life you used to live, you may not be breaking down. You may be waking up. And that process, messy and uncomfortable as it is one of the most sacred things a human being can undergo. If you're in this process and want to understand it more deeply, if you want to navigate awakening with psychological clarity rather than spiritual bypassing, subscribe to Empire of the Mind. We explore individuation, shadow work, and the real psychological territory of transformation. Not the pretty version, the true one. Thank you for your courage to wake up, even when it would be easier to stay asleep.